So here you go. Take it away, Caitlin.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Is there anyone here besides Asher who wasn't here last time? Okay, so I don't have to review a lot of last time. What I think what I will do is we'll go straight to the part of the paper itself that analyzes the survey results. We looked at the survey last time, which was of ordained cantors who became ordained rabbis, and viewed some of the visual representations, the graphs that were provided by the range of their answers. And there were a couple, there were some very important issues that came up. And I'll go now to the paper and we'll, read along with each other a little bit and discuss, or let's see. So I'm going to share. Okay. So the survey results, I titled it, "What do cantors who became rabbis have to say for themselves?" And just reviewing, as we expected, much of this came out exactly the way we expected. We expected there to be pragmatic motivation. We expected there to be some intrinsic draw to a greater leadership role and a leadership role in Torah. That all made perfect sense. But the things that were interesting were issues that had to do with gender, issues with respect, and the changes in respect from a cantor becoming a rabbi. There was some very interesting material revealed about anti-cantor bias and the role that that played in this process, and indications about the sustainability of the clergy role really in any context and how that has to be addressed for the future of Judaism. And these are the things I want us to talk about. And some of the most important comments are here in this section. So I apologize for just showing you the paper if that wasn't what you were looking forward to seeing. There were a lot of indications of a connection to gender. First of all, that a majority of the people who responded were women. It was 60%, and 40% men who had gone on this path and who decided to answer. So here we have excerpts from the comments, from the survey comments that are part of this, the arising of this issue. So one was that I did it for financial security in case my voice ages poorly. Too many female cantors were being told to retire early when their voices weren't as beautiful as they were at the beginning of their careers. And what this reveals about how the systemic resistance to female voices in the cantorate altogether. So there may also be a denominational factor here, that in the reform movement, this transition has not been quite as difficult, but the cantor to rabbi movement started just 2 years after women were accepted into the conservative cantorate. So very quickly, people were choosing this path. So we looked at all the
Caitlin,
different.
I'm sorry, I have a question that I just
Yes,
want to
ma'am.
clarify.
Mhm.
Are you
Yes,
saying,
Rabbi.
I'm sorry, this is Marcia. First of all, Donna also has a question, but
Yes.
so you have to decide if you want to wait for questions till the end or take them now. But one thing I want to understand about what you just said, are you saying that the first instances of women leaving the cantorate and becoming rabbis was early on after, because I mean, who were those people? Who were the first people that did that? Because there weren't lots of those even back in my day.
I don't remember right now.
Okay.
And I'm sorry that I wasn't prepared with that information. But there were some people who, I'm sorry, don't have the information right now.
Specifically women who then stayed and went back to school, because
Mhm.
that was long before there were expedited seminaries and stuff like that. Like you'd
Yes.
have to go back and
Yes.
go.
One of them, I'm remembering one of them. One of them, well, okay, that was a reform. It's a reform.
Yeah,
I apologize. I don't have the
so that's
information.
okay. But
Mhm.
that's interesting to me. I didn't know that. And so Donna, did you have a question?
No, I don't know. I didn't raise my hand, I
Oh,
don't think. I
okay.
just joined you.
Okay, welcome.
Hi.
Good to
Hello,
see you.
hello,
Good to
Donna.
see you, Donna. Okay,
Hi.
thank you. All right, Caitlin. Okay, that was just right. Thanks a
Mhm.
lot. We'll talk about that later.
Okay, great. So we'll just take a look at a few other comments and then talk about our own reaction to this. So I'll go back to the share. Let's see. So this is something we looked at. There were various paths to ordination.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Can you clarify that for some people? Because there are some people now here who were not with us last week.
Okay. Yes, now there must be, I asked initially, didn't know that some of those who had just joined us were not here. We're talking about a survey that was done of ordained cantors who became ordained rabbis and asked them questions about their path, about their choices, and then looked at the results of this, how their employment as rabbis, what that tells us about what's going on with those individuals, and also what's going on with congregations who have changed their attitudes towards hiring people who are cantors, or that they're more interested in people who are these cantor rabbis.
And briefly, what I just want to say, we talked about at length 2 weeks ago, was that there are a range of different, I don't know that you'd even call them all seminaries, but ordination programs that people can choose to pursue this. The long and painful route is like going back to a legacy seminary like the Jewish Theological Seminary or Hebrew Union College, and basically re-enrolling in another program. So like Caitlin and I have a colleague who actually was almost done with cantorial school and then spent 5 more years in rabbinical school. It was like a 9-year thing, and that was Rabbi Cantor Lily Kaufman. So that was really your only choice back in the 90s. And then even the academies for Jewish religion, there's 2 of them. It's a it's it's a an easier you can get a degree from there and still keep your job. That's why they're such an important seminary, but it still takes 5 years. It's also That's also a rigorous program. And then
Yes.
there are expedited seminaries where if you kind of pay the money and do a little this and that, you can get your rabbinic ordination in a year and a half. And so there's a lot of different ways to do that. And I just wanted to qualify that for people.
Yes. So welcome, Sherry. Welcome, Donna and Christine. I believe those are the people who have joined us in the last few minutes. So the gender issue seems to be significant. There is clearly in the evidence more women who are choosing this path. And what is related to that, I believe, is the other issue which came up of the primary pieces of the results that were significant. And that is the tremendous change in how these individuals were treated by lay people pretty much the day after they attained rabbinic ordination. There are remarkable comments on this, and I will try to summarize those for you right now and share a few of them. Yes, okay. So one person said, it's much less awkward to introduce myself as a rabbi. Another said, I do feel that with the added rabbinic skills, I am perceived differently, with more respect and with greater possibilities for the types of roles I can engage in. There is a big difference in what people expect from you. The immediate respect for the title rabbi was interesting. Another said, the kahal, my community, treated me differently as a rabbi. So this was a person who was already in a job and who became a rabbi. And I mean, the way it feels to me when I read this is that they walked in the next morning and people treated them completely differently. So this person said they listened and heard what I had to say. You're respected more by members of the community. You are given more respect and consideration for jobs, and becoming a rabbi gave me more cachet with strangers. So there is this very, very clear, almost remarkable, I think, it really hit me very significantly that the same person with the same qualifications, the same gifts, the same ability to serve, the same Torah, the same love for Judaism, was one day deserving of less respect and the next day deserving of more. What does that tell us about the rabbi and cantor roles? As I went through last time, there is a 2,000-year pattern of there being at least two people who fulfill the religious needs of our people in a public situation. And there have been divisions of labor. What that says to me is that those are bedrock religious needs that have to be met, no matter who meets them. But this was powerful for me that this was so different. So I went a little more deeply into the history of this and discovered, as some of you may remember from last time, that rabbinic texts which mention criticism, contempt, and distrust of cantors by rabbis started appearing in our textual tradition in the 7th century. The first one actually was in the year 600. So that this denigration of the cantor and the second-class status of the cantor and a rabbi's problem with it goes back incredibly far in our tradition. And it is, one author said that basically every rabbinic text that talks about the synagogue over the entire medieval period says something negative about the Hazzan. So what is this? And it became even worse in the 19th century as the transition into the reform movement sidelined cantors. and their salaries were incredibly low. They were treated terribly. Sometimes congregations would decide they wanted a new cantor, and in one case, they invited 3 cantors for one Shabbat and made them compete with each other. So it's really mistreatment. So I became more fascinated by what this said about cantors, even though this thesis was about rabbis. And then I think by looking at that, that tells us something about the future. So I want to just give you a little bit of the background on this anti-cantor bias, and as it appears through history. So Jewish folk humor has lots of jokes and proverbs at the expense of a chazan. One common phrase in Yiddish is "Alla chazonim zeinen naronim." All chazanim are fools. There's an apocryphal story also that I heard when I was at Jewish Theological Seminary, and which is a quote by Rabbi Louis Finkelstein, who was a former chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. A personal note that's interesting there is that the dorm room that I had in the old building was actually his dorm room, and his name was on the door. But what he apparently said when he was asked whether there should be a cantorial school at JTS, he said, "Is there a golf department at Harvard?" So this was already still in the 1950s, the attitude. So it's this double bind between the need for someone with vocal and musical talent to serve as a chazan, and then the distrust and discomfort with, and sometimes contempt for, that very talent is this feature that has been part of our people for thousands of years. The rabbis worried that a prayer leader would indulge in the beauty of their own voice to the detriment of the meaning of the liturgy. And there is also, very interesting, there is no corresponding body of literature that is aimed at criticizing rabbis in our history. One analysis said that there's a dislike for soloists in sacred music, that the rabbinic authorities were very concerned about the Chazan's interest in personal prestige, or being self-indulgent in the sensual, I'm going to say something about sexuality later, but the sensual delight of the power of prayer. So what this made me think about was something that I believe is an even bigger problem and has some Jungian facets, really, some very deep psychological facets about how our culture views all artists, and particularly performing artists. And there is a persistent assumption that these people are less than serious, are somehow suspect of being not the best people, that none of us want our children to go into this profession. And some of that comes from what you may be familiar with, periods in Western culture history when many people who were performing artists were forced to be sex workers, basically, in order to make a living. And then this attitude toward performing artists is something that's persisted. So this is what really interested me, and this is one of the things that I think requires further study. So I'd love to hear any reactions to that and any thoughts you may have about whether you think that's part of the the whole anti-cantor bias. So Ria has her hand up. Yes, please. So unmute and share with us your question.
I always forget to do that. Okay, so I was on the trip with Marcia, Rabbi
Mhm.
Marcia, and with Matt, the Cantor, Matt Austerlich, to Great Britain. If I remember correctly, that Matt told us that the cantors are considered in Great Britain to be in the same status as rabbis. Is that right, Marcia?
Say that again, Ria, that you think that in Great Britain,
No.
cantors, no.
No, that Matt told us that
Yes.
cantors in Great Britain are at the same status as rabbis. They're considered the clergy, and he that one Shabbat when he dressed in the cantorial out, the full regalia, which was gorgeous what he did, and so that was a different view than what we get now here. And so I wanted to, that it was my impression correct? And Susan was on the trip too.
Yeah. I don't know if that was across the board. That might have, in the great synagogues of Great Britain that
Yeah.
had a lustrous cantorial tradition, and many did. Maybe that was the case, but I wouldn't be surprised if remember, there were gazillions of synagogues in Britain, many of which are gone now because the population has died down. I wouldn't be surprised if the overall feel that Caitlin's describing, the people that are resentful of artists, of gregarious personalities, of people with enormous talent, wasn't a challenge for rabbis who had to work with them. Maybe not the congregants, because they're so I don't know if that was broad. Now Cantor Neil is on the trip, but he might remember this also in a different way.
Mhm.
And the other thing I wanted to ask is that here in the United States, and this is just my experience, that cantorial soloists are used in the majority of places that I've been. And they're often people that were camp song leaders and, maybe musicians in rock and roll bands or something. And they bring in that type of music into the congregation. And they're called cantors, but they're really not cantors. They're song leaders. And I don't know if that has any effect on people's concept of music in liturgical music, and not hearing liturgical music, but that other, and also some of the things we think of as liturgical music, which were German beer hall songs. So I don't know if that has any effect on the attitude or the concept of, but first of all, the congregants and also the rabbi.
Ria, thank you for that. I'm hearing two questions there, or two different areas that I feel bear on your question. First of all, you are talking about the present, and we are also talking about people who are living in the present. I would say that one thing I would say about the presence of those song leader cantorial soloists, many of whom are very, very wonderful. Some of them are deeply learned Jewish people, but they are not ordained cantors who have gone to seminary. That one of the effect of that is in creating fewer jobs for the ordained cantors. And so that has a very strong effect on the people who may be motivated to take this step to become rabbis, basically in order to remain employed. That because there are so many cantorial soloists, whom congregations feel very well served by. That wasn't the best grammar, but so I think that the way it affects this study, at least, is in creating the climate that we're in, where there are fewer cantorial jobs, and cantors are having to make a number of painful or difficult career decisions. With respect to your speaking about the German beer hall songs, one of the things that has always been it's not new, that the music of the surrounding culture was incorporated into liturgical music. That has happened in every place and every time that Jewish people, every circumstance they've been in, and the folk music has been absorbed into liturgy. So I don't see those two things as the same thing. And that was one of the things that kept liturgical music developing and growing and being relevant. One really fun example, and it's not an ancient example, is that there's a very, very well-loved tune in the Hallel prayers that are done on the festivals and on Rosh Chodesh, on the new moon services. And I'll just sing you a little bit of it. And Sherry, why don't you unmute, because you can do the other part. Sherry and I have worked together musically in the past. So here goes. Malacha hayam,
Malacha hayam,
Hitanus,
Hitan,
Hayarden,
Hayarden,
Kisav Leachor.
Isoleachor.
Thank you, Sherry. So some of you may be familiar with that tune. If you are, nod. Okay. So it is a responsive tune. It's something people love to sing. The congregation gets to sing the high part, Ya Yarden. Okay, that tune comes from the Yiddish theater in the early part of this century, and it was a tango. So think of it differently. Da 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 da. Okay, so it's a tango, and yet it has come into the liturgy and beautifully expresses that prayer and puts people's hearts and souls into it. So I would say the absorption of the surrounding music is one of the beautiful things about our tradition. And so I think, we can keep doing that. I have a background in Irish music, and I usually do a service every year where I use Irish melodies for the Friday night service. So I don't see those two things as related particularly. Any other questions or thoughts that have come up? Marsha, Rabbi Marsha.
I was just going to say that, I think, and the artistry of the cantor, who has studied and has an appreciation for, let's say, the last 500 years of the Torah of our musical tradition, is that person doesn't mean that we're, like wearing the shtreimel and the same outfit that they were wearing in Poland in the 1600s. It's not like nothing should change from the sounds of, centuries ago. But the idea that we don't lose it completely, that you can take da 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 da, but then when you close, the cantor would understand that you would close in what is Hallel Nusach.
Yes.
Da 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 da.
Right.
You wouldn't just be learning a melody because you had a good ear, but you trained to understand how to weave the past and the present together. That's a big piece of the artistry of the Hazzan, don't you think?
I would agree. And that, and I think that is something that a trained Hazzan can bring that is less likely to be in the wheelhouse of a cantorial soloist, although it's not unheard of. So, any other thoughts about this anti-cantor bias and why a person who was an amazing leader yesterday and is the same leader today is treated maybe, 180 degrees differently the next day? How does that hit you? What does it mean to you?
Sylvia?
I think it totally speaks to the almost unbending of the hierarchical structure of sacred Judaism. Because if obviously, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Are
can you
are you saying,
elaborate on that?
are you saying, Sylvia, that it's the relationship between the Levites and the Kohanim? Meaning the Kohanim are the ones that did the temple service and sacrifice, and it was the Levites that sort of were the preparers for that, that set the atmosphere, that made people feel relaxed before they actually had to go in and approach, the sacred altar. I don't know if that's what you're saying. I mean, is
Well, and they were they were actually the singers. That's correct, from what I understand. But I think I'm saying that that one of the things that the women's movement in Judaism has been trying to get through, and from the late 60s and 70s, is that overwhelming sense of its a patriarchal society. It's an unbending hierarchy, the whole structure of Judaism. And I'm thinking that this is what this says. It still is.
And so are you seeing the gender component as part of this, that the fact that women came into the profession, do you feel this is more pronounced?
I don't really know, because I don't know.
Does it
I don't know
seem
enough.
like it would be?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm thinking about our friend Jason Fetty, who's acting as cantor for Temple Isaiah, and I don't think anybody ever thought that he was unlearned or, well, I don't know what, but we still gave him the respect due. But
Sylvia, I'm sorry, I want to interrupt. I think that's very interesting. Jason Fetty was absolutely not a cantor, and
right,
never trained and knew and never did. And so and it was a small mini. I mean, that's the other thing, Caitlin. This, Temple Isaiah was basically a group of people that met on Friday nights, and so I think that's also like. I mean, the fact, Sylvia, that I wouldn't even think of Jason in this conversation at all. And the fact that you even bring him up shows the difference, I think, also, Caitlin, between like the laity and the professionals. He's a musician that was helping a congregation. And that's what he would say that he was. But people wanted to believe that he was the cantor, so they called him Cantor. Do you see what I'm saying? And if he was in this conversation, I would say the same thing right now. There's no shame in that. But that's also a big challenge. Like if Sylvia thinks he's, if some people think he's the cantor, but really, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you distinguish that? And another question I have is, did people experience different things with their rabbis when it was two women, or the rabbi was the woman and there was a male cantor? I'm sort of interested to know if you learned anything about that.
That could be really interesting.
Yes, that is a very interesting part of the journey of bringing women into the profession. The move from a male-female bima presence to a double female is something that is becoming accepted, but it is newer. And it brings up different things, I think, psychologically. I mean, one of the things that interests me here is the psychology that's been underneath our practice and our communal practice, and what it is that drives us in either functional or dysfunctional directions with our communal life. So would you say that perhaps the cantorate, based on what you're saying, Sylvia, and the other thoughts that have been expressed, that perhaps the cantorate has become a woman's profession with the same issues in society that make it devalued, they're compensated less, not considered as serious, like teachers and nurses who are very competent professionals, but our society doesn't look at them. So do you feel there's a connection there between that idea of a woman's profession?
Actually, I think you may be right. I hadn't thought of it that way, but when you think of what used to be men's professions in society, in general society, and secretaries up until the 1920s were men, and women couldn't get into those professions. And as soon as they got in, men started walking away, and the women's professions, oh, she's just a secretary, and she's the
Just
girl
a
who brings you the
secretary.
coffee, and she's the girl, she's not the woman, she's not the professional.
Yeah, I'll get
And
my girl to do that for you.
that's exactly right. And I think that runs through all of our society, and whether we're conscious of it or not. You think about even with women rabbis. Are you
The
are you
women rabbis are not exempt from this. There are many, many gender issues for women rabbis. And Cantor, who becomes a rabbi who is a woman, will discover that. And it is persistent, and it is sometimes really disturbing. So yes.
Ria?
Yeah, I wanted to look at also the Orthodox or more traditional congregations that have existed, and they're Eastern European congregations.
Okay. Mhm.
And the tradition of the rabbi not giving a sermon, but is the person who is the knowledgeable one who talks about halacha and leads from a very strict religious perspective. And then you have the people in the congregation who are prayer leaders. And if they have nice voices, then it's really a nice experience. And they don't always have a formalized cantor. I don't know how long that has existed. If this goes way back, or it's just a fairly, like 19th, 20th century thing. So that the flexibility of how these religious professionals relate to the congregation and their role, I don't think it's a fast, line that this has and I don't know historically looking back how that goes since the beginning of the concept of the synagogue.
Thank you, Ria. Would you like to be a partner in our further research?
Very,
wonderful. You seem very, very interested in the history. So I did write a fair bit. Not everyone thought the ancient roles were relevant to this discussion, but I did. And I wrote quite a bit about that. The idea of a Orthodox cantor, in the sense that we know a cantor, a professional, very elevated musical professional. I believe that is more recent. The Orthodox, I believe, have maintained the leadership structure that I talked about that really starts with the Kohen and the Levite. But the actual person on the bima in an Orthodox setting or traditional setting is the Shaliach Tzibor, the person who is the messenger of the community, who can be a volunteer from the congregation. But there have also been people who are called Hazzan, who are more educated in the more elaborate aspects of synagogue music, perhaps for the, specifically for the High Holy Days, when there's a lot of additional material, which is very complicated Hebrew poetry. And it's sort of like, you need the Shakespearean actor for that. You need the person who has that grounding and the ability to musically present it. So all through history, there's a Shaliach Tzibor and a Chazan, and sometimes they're the same person and sometimes they're not. But they are the one leading the service. If we're talking about, a focus which is on who's leading the service, the cantor was the one who did the whole service, and the rabbi was there as a teacher. And the rabbi might, as you say, speak about halacha, particularly before a holiday. And it wasn't until the 19th century that rabbis gave sermons regularly, which you had correctly. They gave them a few times a year, specifically when there was a need for halachic instruction, like the week before Pesach. So yes, the rabbi was there as a teacher, but the rabbi was not necessarily serving as the Chazan. They were there, they were present. Sometimes they were studying while the other people were praying. And there are a lot of descriptions of that in the Talmud of, this rabbi was sitting on the side, studying, and, there was, so it really paints that picture of the rabbi's role. Yes, now, and there are certainly famous Orthodox cantors, but in general, the modern Orthodox movement does not feel the need for cantors. There is a training school at the Yeshiva University, but the Orthodox movement has moved away. Certainly the modern Orthodox movement in America. Yes, Rabbi Marcia, how can you add to that?
No, I was just going to say, I remember in our classes that it was Jack Mendelson, Cantor Mendelson, our coach and teacher, who was the one that pointed out to us that it was really the beginning of the demise of the cantorate broadly was the Young Israel movement in the United States, where they just felt that, but it wasn't cantor as ritual directors. See, that's the other thing. Many of the cantors that I grew up with, were our ritual directors. They were the ones, my cantors made sure the Torah was read, that the children were taught. I didn't grow up with cantors who were prima donnas. I never grew up with a cantor with a great voice. I didn't even know, that's why I thought I could go to cantorial school. I mean, I could carry a tune. I thought I can do that. You know what I'm saying? Like I was, and when I got to cantorial school and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing here? Because, I really didn't have the musicality or the musical chops to do that job in that way, to be like a Mizrahi, but I did feel like I could be a teacher. You know what I'm saying? Like these other people. So I think that's one of the challenges with the role, is that it looks very different depending on the size of the synagogue, where is the synagogue, the needs of the synagogue. If we're talking about a larger institution, they're not teaching the children. They are really the artistes and creating a field. You know what I'm saying? So that's also, I'm wondering if that came up in your studies too, like depending on what your role was. And I would just suspect that the great musical performers never felt the need to become rabbis, because they were the great musical performers that never lost their cachet. It's the rest of us who were doing all the work. And, we had our own jokes in the cantorate. You remember, like, it's like all you have to do to become a rabbi is know how to announce pages. Like we were like,
right, or that they had to learn how to do this.
Right, we're running the synagogue. We're doing everything. We're planning every program, everything, and that was, I think, part of the tension, at least for many of us. I don't know.
Yes, that ritual director piece that has definitely been part of my work as a cantor. You're the one who goes in and rolls the Torahs. You're the one who makes sure the ritual things are, are properly set up for, the service, what's been set up for the holidays. There are larger synagogues who have ritual directors and executive directors who help with that. But generally, all of that, I mean, it really is the heavy lifting. Like when you go in on your own and open up the ark and take out the Torah so that you can roll it, that is heavy lifting. But it is yes. So the ritual director, and that's a role that people don't see. So part of this is about what you see on the bima and what this person is actually doing. I shared a comment last time from someone who it was a very, very emotional comment about how demeaning this person's experience of being a cantor was, and how sick, I believe it was a woman, how really disgusted she was with basically doing much more work than the rabbi and getting a third of the salary, or some, she gave some sort of percentage, but I think she said half the salary for all the work. So that is also a feature. So any other thoughts about that aspect? I'll share a little bit more with you about oh, sorry. Excuse me, I need to close the door of my room, which I forgot to do. I think the issue that that is related to this respect issue and about what it means for cantors to be moving into this role is the issue of sustainability. And what I mean by that is what does the cantor rabbi phenomenon tell us about the future? The question that was asked of the respondents was, do you think this role will continue? And it was a 100% response, which was yes, I believe it's the wave of the future, basically, and that the combined role is really important. And a lot of pragmatic issues were mentioned. Synagogues are smaller, they can't afford to hire someone, they can't afford to hire two people. And so one person has to become the person who fulfills all these religious needs, which our people have had for centuries and which have always been provided by at least two people. So what the question that came up for me when I read all of these answers, yet, absolutely, yes. And this makes a huge difference. My question was, my observation and question were, this is incredible. And it is for me. I'm having the experience right now of moving into a new position with a great salary and the respect of a community and their eagerness to welcome me as their leader. And it is really amazing. And it's an incredible experience. And I know that many of these and that is what is expressed in the survey, this incredible experience of the cantor person with the cantorial background finally being the recognized leader. And that's great. But how long can one person do two full-time jobs? And if the expectation of the congregation is that all these needs will be met, maybe that works right now for people like me, and it makes a tremendous difference in our individual lives. But what does it mean for the next generation? And what does it mean for the problem of the work-life balance of a person in a clergy role? One of the reasons that we know there is a shortage of rabbis right now, there are two reasons why, two main reasons why there's a shortage of rabbis. One is the sustainability issue, and that younger rabbis are no longer willing to, completely neglect their families and not have functional marriages in order to serve a community and put the community first. Also, there is the financial problem. A young rabbi with children to raise cannot live on the salaries that congregations can afford to pay now. So that is another aspect which is part of the economics. So I'm not sure this is something that will, in my sense is, I'm not sure it's something that will last. And we'll be faced with the same problem of the sustainability and the issues of how stressful it is and how hard it is to be clergy and how much it burns people out. So what became the ICAR, the central idea for me there, was to look at the psychology, and I think this is a whole, area of research, but the psychology of congregations in terms of what they expect and what they expect from their clergy, and what is the psychology there that also leads them to mistreat their clergy and make things more difficult for them. And as many of us know, toxic synagogue politics are a scourge of our people, and we find it difficult to treat each other nicely, not just in synagogue politics. So I think we're looking at something huge here, but it's something that needs to be addressed if we're going to go forward as people, because if we keep chipping away at each other inside our institutions, we won't survive. And so I feel those are larger questions that are raised. I do believe the role will persist. And I think it's great that by becoming a rabbi, we're starting to recognize what cantors have always had. Some of these people said, oh yeah, I went back and became a rabbi, and it was super easy for me because I already knew it. So I think there needs to be a change in I think that there needs to be spiritual education for all of us about what it means to be in sacred community. And I think there are many people who are working on this. So I think, there's economic issues here, and there are psychological issues. So does anyone have something they want to share about that in our last few minutes? Yes, Arlene, please unmute and share with us.
Hi, I am living in Pittsburgh, PA for a long time. I've wanted to be a cantor or rabbi for about 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I've experienced is I've been a service leader, both at Tree of Life and at another small congregation here. It's the vast majority of clergy, Jewish clergy in the Pittsburgh area are male. And even though I've studied voice at Oberlin and in Pittsburgh, and I've studied with rabbis for many years, I have not been treated, even as a volunteer service leader, the way that men are who lead services, let alone rabbis or cantors. And I'm very disillusioned, though I'd still like to become one. I'm getting older, but I think it's different in other cities, like in California, in New York. in other places. But I've really, encountered this as a person sincerely interested. The prejudices against women here leading services are very strong. And again, it's probably not that way in Southern California or New York or New Jersey, because I've met Jack Mendelson. I've met Mizrahi at the North American Jewish Choral Festival. I've met famous cantors, and rabbis. It's very frustrating as a woman over 50 that's wanted to become a rabbi or cantor for a long time. I'm considering moving, but I'm still here. And I've been listening carefully to what you're saying, because I think synagogues of whatever size need to figure out what their priorities are and who you're hiring and the level of respect that is given to a woman.
Thank you so much for sharing on that. I would say that I would agree that it is better in some places, but it is a problem everywhere. And even where the women have risen, they are still suffering from gender bias. Sylvia, you had a thought.
Yeah, and thank you so much for this series, Rabbi Caitlin. This has been quite amazing. I think that all of it speaks to a larger issue, which is what is actually happening to the synagogues as a whole. How about your synagogue? But my synagogue, we're all very happy this weekend because we're up to 70 members. Hello. And the average age of our members is my age. And we're not going too far, And as far as I can tell, that's a trend, So what are we going to do in the bigger picture, in the broader picture, not just to keep us, our cantors, our rabbis, but to keep us as sacred communities? What is that? How's it going to look? And that's something I think we have to look at.
Yes, and this question comes up in different ways as we look at different aspects of our history, and the looking at the actual, it's a sort of narrow focus of the specific ordained clergy isn't the only thing to look at. And one of the most important things about learning together as Jews is finding the right questions. If we end up with questions, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So thank you for that question. Anybody else have a big question that has come up for them as we go through? Sherry.
Actually, there's two things that
you just muted yourself.
Sorry. One thing was there a difference regarding the aging voice of the male cantor versus the female cantor?
Okay, let me answer that first.
Okay.
The only issues of aging the voice came up from female cantors.
Okay. Which is what I thought would be the answer. The second is regarding in our congregation. I'm in Sacramento, California, in the only conservative shul here, Mosaic Law. And in the 19 years that I've been here, we're now on our third cantor, and there were gaps in between, and the politics were nasty in the release of each cantor as they went. And there was a thought, you were talking about lay leaders, service, leaders. And there was a thought, well, we don't really need a cantor because we have an enormous amount of lay service leaders. And in our congregation, many of them are women. We have men and women, but it was the idea that the cantor as a clergy was really not needed.
Yes. And that was one of the issues that came up, particularly in the 21st century developments, that synagogues who were getting smaller one of the first things they did was gather in their boardrooms and say, oh, the cantor is a luxury. And not seeing it as essential. And what I have observed is that that also is something that works for a while. For a while, you get along with some lay leaders davening, but after a while, there is something that's being lost in sort of the core that's not being fed, that's not being developed, and it becomes stagnant and it no longer serves. And as Rabbi Marcia was saying at the beginning, what a trained cantor can do is to continue to bring the guts of the tradition and the ways in which the nice melodies also mix with the nusach, and with which is a term for the structure of synagogue music and the ways in which it is structured differently for different parts of the liturgy. And that's something that a trained cantor can do. One of the things we know for sure about human beings, and it's absolutely played out in synagogues, which is that everybody wants what's familiar. And if that's all you give them, they will get bored and things will stagnate. And so your job is always to both find a way to give enough comfort food and to put some challenge in there, because as human beings, we do stagnate without change and growth. So, but we're making you uncomfortable when we do that. And as you know, probably one of the great complaints about cantors is, I can't sing along. I don't know the melodies. Why doesn't he do the traditional melody, which is whatever one that person grew up with? Thank you so much for being here and for listening and participating and for sharing your own experiences with leadership. Rabbi Marcia and I are going to continue this. We have ideas for a book. We feel that there's a lot of important material here that can be enlightening and can help us move forward as a people.
Thank you. And come back next week. Rabbi Marcia and Cantor Matt will be talking about their recent trip to Jewish
Oh,
Creek.
yes.
Their trip to the British Isles. Absolutely show up for that. All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Toda rabah. Bye.
Thank you so much.